Good morning, Otters. Hope you are all safe and happy and well. Hope you are getting on okay with all of your online learning. Please email me if you have any problems. So we've only got about 30 more pages left. We have found out who the murderer is, and now we are going to see what's going to happen next. So, all right, said Daisy. Let me begin. We were all sitting in the library. Inspector Priestley had ushered everyone in there after we dropped our bombshell. All the chairs and tables were still shifted about, so that Lady Hastings could have space to convalesce, and seeing them in different places, with Lady Hastings sitting up like a queen in the middle of the room, suddenly made the whole scene feel very unreal. It was as though we had stepped sideways into another house entirely, where a different Wales family lived. The inspector still had his cuffs on Lord Hastings, but Noakes was standing over Stephen, one heavy hand pressing down on his shoulder. Stephen looked like he wanted to weep, and I felt the same. I kept on thinking of him as my friend, and then remembering with a jolt that he was not my friend at all. It made me sick and angry, as though I had been tricked. All the nice memories I had of him twisted up and went sour. I felt as though the person I was staring at was someone I had never met before. I suppose in a way he was. I was brought back to the present by Daisy elbowing me not very nicely. "Hazel," she said. "I need you for the announcement." "It's not an announcement," I said. "We're not in a book. We're only explaining what happened." "Well then," Daisy said, "I need you for that. Help me explain." "Where are we?" I asked. As usual, Daisy was enjoying this part far too much. She is happiest when she is standing up and talking, and everyone else is sitting down and listening. Sounds a bit like me. "I've just told them about how Mr. Curtis stole the Bamptons' things," said Daisy, "just like he was trying to do here. He was nosing around our antiques, and then we heard him trying to persuade Mummy to come away with him and bring her jewels. Stephen must have recognised Mr. Curtis, and if he didn't at once, he would have as soon as he saw him flashing his father's watch around," I agreed. "And then when we were playing sardines, he saw Mr. Curtis trying to make Lady Hastings run away with him after tea. He must have felt as though everything was happening all over again. I could see that he was terribly upset. We ran down to the ground floor and, while I went into the library to look for Beanie and Kitty, he must have gone into the cupboard and scooped some of the arsenic powder out into the piece of paper ripped out of the book in his pocket. I remembered Stephen running into the library after me on Saturday afternoon, flushed and out of breath, and felt sick with fury. It would have been easy for him to get it. It would only have taken a minute at the most, Daisy explained. Then all he needed to do was wait for everyone to gather round the tea table before slipping the arsenic into a cup of tea. Stephen must have thought that his luck had come in when Mummy actually asked for tea from Mr. Curtis. He passed it on, knowing that it would still get to Mr. Curtis without him actually having to hand it to him. And of course, the person he handed it to was Daddy. Something suddenly occurred to me. "But what was Lord Hastings doing if he didn't put the poison in?" I asked. "I saw his face straight after he had handed the cup to Mr. Curtis. He looked so guilty. That's what Chapman thought too." "An excellent question," said Inspector Priestley, "and one that I have certainly been wrestling with. Lord Hastings, would you care to explain your actions?" Lord Hastings coughed. He said, I hardly think I need to explain myself. Could you simply take my word that I had nothing to do with the murder?" "Unfortunately not," said the inspector. "Oh, come on, Daddy, don't be an idiot," said Daisy. "Just tell us. We know that you do some terribly stupid things. We're all quite used to it." Poor Lord Hastings, I thought. Sometimes I do think that Daisy is terribly cruel to her parents. A red flush spread across Lord Hastings' plump cheeks. He said again, well, if you must know, I tipped salt into Mr. Curtis's cup before I handed it to him." Chapman put his hands over his eyes. "George, whatever were you thinking?" cried Lady Hastings. "Daddy!" shrieked Daisy. "It seemed quite funny to me at the time," said Lord Hastings, trying to look dignified. "Of course, I see in retrospect that it might not have been quite the thing to do. But there are some things that a man simply can't take lying down. and someone coming into his house and stealing his wife is one of them." "Good heavens, George, nobody stole me," snapped Lady Hastings. "I'm not a rug or a vase. I can do what I like." "I know," said Lord Hastings. "I do try to understand, but it was rather difficult this time. I hope you'll forgive me." Lady Hastings sniffed. "Daddy, if that was it, you've had everyone thinking you were guilty of murder. Look, Chapman's crying, poor thing." "I certainly am not," Chapman said quickly, wiping the wet off his face. "Do forgive me. I was yawning. I must be tired." Said Lord Hastings again. "Yes, well, I apologise." Daisy rolled her eyes. "Anyway," she said, "then Mr. Curtis drank the poisoned tea and expired. Stephen must have felt pleased, but then he realised that he'd forgotten something. The teacup was still in the dining room, full of arsenic, and if the police were called in, they'd find it at once, with his fingerprints on it. The watch was also there, and of course he wanted that too, as it was his by rights. He waited until the house had gone quiet, pinched the keys from the umbrella stand, and then went into the dining room to clear out the cup and steal Mr. Curtis's watch. Quite by mistake, we disturbed him while he was still in the room." I looked over at Stephen and shuddered. When we ran out, he must have stuffed the cup and watch into his dressing gown pocket, locked the door again, put the keys back in the stand and gone upstairs. Then all he had to do was slip into the kitchen the next day, while Mrs. D and Hetty were out of the room, and put the cup back with the washing up. They noticed it, which wasn't part of the plan, but of course they had no idea who had put it there, and we didn't either. When Mummy was pushed, we thought we could rule Stephen out. He had no motive that we could see, and he was up on the top floor. We heard him come thumping down after she fell, and Uncle Felix raised the alarm. But of course, he must have crept down the servants' stairs, shoved Mummy, dashed back up again, and then come down by the front stairs, innocent as anything. He must have thought that when she talked to the police, she would tell them something that might incriminate him. "But how could you?" she asked, turning suddenly on Stephen. "Mr. Curtis really was a criminal, but Mummy never did anything to you. She didn't deserve to be almost murdered." Stephen shook his head. He said, "I thought Lady Hastings was Miss Alston. She's spoken to me earlier that day. She threatened me, and I realised that she suspected me. It was so dark at the top of the stairs, and she was standing with her back to me. I would never have pushed Lady Hastings if I'd known." Lady Hastings looked outraged, and I thought slightly put out. Just like Daisy, she likes to be the reason for everything. "Really, I don't believe that for a moment. You wanted to murder me," she said, "and after I invited you into my home." "Never mind all that," said Uncle Felix smoothly. "I think we've heard enough, Inspector. Don't you agree?" A look passed between them, and Miss Alston caught the tail of it. She straightened her blouse, cleared her throat, and said, "Indeed." Of course, I realised, Miss Alston really did know Uncle Felix. If she was a policewoman and Uncle Felix was whatever he was, they must both be on the side of the law, with Inspector Priestley. That was why Uncle Felix had not wanted to call in the police. He knew that they were already there. Now they must both be desperate to cover up the truth of who Miss Alston was and what she was doing in the house. Daisy narrowed her eyes, glaring at the two of them and Inspector Priestley, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something. For once, though, she seemed to decide that it was best to stay quiet. I was glad. "And that's really it, you see," she went on, turning to the inspector. "That's how Stephen did both crimes. The evidence is all there, the page, the book, and the watch. So do you believe us? Do you? You must. It all makes sense." Inspector Priestley's forehead was the wrinkliest I'd ever seen it. He said. "I do, as a matter of fact. Mr. Bampton, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Stephen opened his mouth emptily. His voice, when it came out, was empty too, or hollow. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry about Lady Hastings. I didn't mean to hurt her, and I would never have hurt anyone else." I suddenly knew exactly what I wanted to say to him. "That's not true," I said. "You would have let Daisy's father be punished for what you did. And me. You made me think you were a good person. How could you?" "I thought I was," said Stephen miserably. "I think That was the first true thing he had said to me all weekend. Okay, and we're going to leave it there for now. Okay, so as I said before, hope you have a lovely Tuesday. Hope you get on okay with all your work, and let me know if you have any problems. See you tomorrow.